Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Lara Aleluia. I'm a researcher at RFF-CMCC EIEE, the European Institute on Economics and the Environment. And today we're gonna listen to a paper called The Impacts on the COVID Lockdown on Air Pollution in Lombardia by Francesco Granella. Francesco is a PhD student at the Public Policy and Administration at Bocconi University. He has also obtained his master there in Economics and Social Sciences. And he has a post-degree, is a post-degree researcher at RFF-CMCC, the European Institute on Economics and the Environment. He has also conducted some research at the OECD Development Center, and his research currently focuses on the crossing of the environmental, political, and development economics. Our discussant today, we're very happy to have here Guido Lanzani from ARPA Lombardia. ARPA is the regional environmental agency. He has been the head of the air quality unit since 2001. He's graduated in physics. He has a postdoc in health statistics and is the an executive master in public management. He directs all the activities concerning monitoring, emission inventory, and modeling on air quality in Lombardia. And he also coordinates and provides technical support to the regional government on the implementation of EU legislation, delineating strategies and adopting measures to improve air quality. So now just a few words on our institute. So RFF-CMCC is a transatlantic partnership between two research institutes on economic, climate, and the environment. It's a partnership between the European Mediterranean Center on Climate Change here in Italy and Resources for the Future in the US. And our mission is to improve environmental and natural resource decisions through impartial economic research and policy engagement. So the session we will have around 30 minutes presentation from Francesco, and then we will have Guido as a discussant. And to participate in the Q&A session, please just use the question tab on the GoToWebinar control panel on your right. Just a note, as you might be interested, this will be recorded. This webinar will be recorded and uploaded to the CMCC YouTube channel. You have the link there, and also on the CMCC and EIEE websites. If you have any further questions, please email webinar@cmcc.it. Just for future webinars, I'm happy to tell you that on the 8th of July, we will be presenting a seminar on fostering green finance for a climate resilient post-COVID-19 recovery. So it's good that we are already talking about post-COVID. And it will be given by Barbara Buchner, Ivan Faiella, and Saria Lovisolo, and moderated by Massimo Tavoni. With that being said, I hand on now the role of presenter to Francesco. Hope you enjoy the seminar.
Okay, it's all set. I guess you can hear me and see my screen. Can you confirm that?
I can hear you.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Lara, very much for the introduction. I'd just like to apologize if I can speak with a low tone of voice. I have a small cut in my mouth that it's making it hard to speak very loud. So if there's something you can understand, just let me know. Okay, let me get started reminding us of the cost that air pollution is for our societies. It has been estimated that fine particulate matter, or PM2.5, is the 5th leading risk factor for death in the world, accounting for more than 4 million premature deaths in 2015 alone. There's also a growing body of literature in economics that finds that exposure to fine particulate matter decreases both physical and cognitive productivity. I could not find comparable estimates for nitrogen dioxide, but it has also been found that in Europe alone in 2016, we had more than 70,000 premature deaths attributed to exposure to nitrogen dioxides, or NO2. So the global cost of air pollution is truly incredible, and we need adequate policy to tackle this problem. However, we still have there's still uncertainty on the way that policy translates into emissions and on the mapping from emissions to concentrations. Now, so this paper will tries to reduce a little bit of this uncertainty on second step, the mapping from emission to concentrations, and we do so exploiting the incredible reduction in emissions that has followed the imposition of restrictive measures of lockdown in the northern region, so the region of Lombardy in northern Italy. And we focus on PM2.5 and NO2. We do so using a machine learning algorithm and a simple, very simple strategy that does not require having to find a region that is similar to Lombardy, but it has not been treated. For this reason, we believe that our approach can easily be replicated somewhere else. We estimate the effects of the lockdown on concentrations, and then we estimate, so we calculate the numbers of years of life that have been saved by improvement in air quality, and compare that to the years of life that have been lost to COVID-19 in the same region that has been hardly hit by the pandemic. You might have seen these images that have made the headlines a few months back. They portray the concentrations of nitrogen dioxides over Southern Europe in the first weeks of 2020, on the first weeks of the lockdown in 2020, and the same period of the year in 2019. Now, it's apparent that the reduction in concentration is remarkable. It's very large. But unfortunately, we cannot just compare year on year these two numbers to estimate the causal effect of the lockdown on emissions. And the reason is that we will be neglecting the confounding factors, the confounding effect of an important variable, which is weather. So weather is an important driver of concentrations, and for this, if we omit that, we will be getting biased estimates. So let me give you a motivating example. I've plotted here wind speed on top and relative humidity on the bottom, measured in Milan in March of 2020 and 2019. So the blue line is 2019, and the orange line is 2020. Now you can see that 2019 had more windy days than 2020, and you had systematically lower relative humidity. So maybe let's just focus on wind speed, as it is easier to use an example. So if the wind in Milan, as it happens, typically brings away pollution from the city, then if we compared the concentration observed in Milan in March 2019 to those observed in March 2020, we'll be underestimating the effect of the lockdown because we will have in that number also compounded the effect of different weather. So any study that tries to estimate the effect of a lockdown needs to address weather. Now, there are many studies that have been working on this task, and among them, I want to select a couple that I think are more similar to ours. These two papers by He and co-authors and Cole and co-authors, they specifically look at the effect of lockdown in Chinese cities on pollution. Now, they use different approaches to control for the confounding effect of weather, but they both exploit the staggered adoption of restrictive measures in Chinese cities. So essentially, they compared cities that have been treated, that means that have been subject to lockdown, to cities that had not yet been subject to a lockdown. However, this availability of comparable cities may not always be available. especially now that, especially outside China, when more or less anywhere in the world you had some degree of restrictive measures. So we distance ourselves from these papers as we relax this assumption of having to find a similar region has not been subject to restrictions. There is also a very literature that uses machine learning to forecast pollution. But typically these studies try to make predictions over the next hour or up to the next few days. So we also distance ourselves from these studies as we build a counterfactual for the pollution in Lombardy that for a period of more than 2 months. So how we do it? Well, we instead of trying to control for weather in Lombardy in 2020, we exploit the fact that the concentrations are so dependent on the weather, at least in this region. So we turn the problem upside down. We train a machine learning algorithm to predict concentrations of pollutants in normal times, that is before the lockdown, taking as input only weather variables in a set of calendar variables like year, month, and so on and so forth. Once we have trained this algorithm on business as usual times, we use it so we feed it with the weather we have observed during the lockdown, and we thus obtain our counterfactual. We find that the population-weighted concentration of PM2.5 decreased by more than a fifth, and the concentration of nitrogen dioxide went down by more than a third. We find, so as I was mentioning, we compare the years of life that have been saved by the improvement in inequality. So we calculate this, and we find that it is more than 10% of the years of life that have been lost to COVID-19 in Lombardy until the end of May. So in the rest of the presentation, I'm going to quickly explain why we focus on Lombardy, and then describe the most important moments of the lockdown and the days that led up to it, and see how the lockdown might have had an important effect on emissions of different sectors. Then I'll review the empirical strategy and the data a little bit more in detail. And before jumping to results, I'll discuss the validity of our counterfactual. So why do we focus on Lombardy? For two main reasons. So first of all, Lombardy has experienced the first major outbreak of COVID-19 in Europe, and one of the first lockdowns in the world outside China. So for this reason, the lockdown of Lombardy was rather unexpected, and it's easier for us to say when the lockdown started, because it is less likely than other places to have had an anticipatory effect. But the truly bigger reason why we focus on Lombardy is that because it is one of the most polluted regions in OECD countries, and especially so once you take into account its income level. COVID-19, so the first case of COVID-19 was identified the first case in Italy was identified at the end of January. But then for the following 3 weeks, the situation in Italy seemed apparently under control, until on February 21st, a first outbreak was identified in southern Lombardy, and by the end of the day, 70 people had tested positive, and within 24 hours, 11 municipalities in the region had been locked down. And they had decided to what I call a hard lockdown, and by that I mean that there was a stay-at-home order. Only essential economic activities were allowed to carry on. Of course, schools were closed, and people could only get out of their houses to buy food or medicine or essential activities. Why am I saying this? Because this type of lockdown is more or less is what has been then extended to Lombardy, and then to entire Italy. So this is a rather hard lockdown, not as hard as has been seen on so far, but rather restrictive. A few days after, on the first Monday, schools and university in entire Lombardia were shut down, and we'll see how this might have already had an effect on mobility. And by March 8th, Lombardia was locked down, and on the following day, March 9, the entire country had been subject to lockdown. Now, the lockdown stayed more or less the same, very restrictive until the until the beginning of May, except some tightening of restriction towards the end of March, when the list of essential activities was further narrowed down. For instance, after March 24th, March 23rd, construction works could no longer operate. How could have this affected sectoral emissions? Well, we don't have precise, we don't have data on emissions, so we rely on proxies. I've plotted here mobility indexes that have been compiled by Google and Apple, and you can see that already after the lockdown of the 11 municipalities and the closure of schools, mobility already significantly decreased. Also, I should mention that during the same period, remote working was already encouraged. Then by mid-March, mobility really plummeted. It reached some levels of something like 75% less of the usual levels. And we'll see these changes will come back into when we look at the results. Here I'm plotting instead energy demand, so energy demand in northern Italy. What can we see from this is that industrial activity, which is a big source of consumption of energy, started decreasing after the lockdown and after the tightening of restrictions, and reached almost 50% of normal levels. So industrial activities also decreased substantially, but not as much as road transport. And I'm saying this because we will see this. This can explain the reduction and the fact that it's only a partial reduction. In fact, the two big sectors was emission was contribution to the pollution in the region is very important. Those in agriculture most likely were not affected, at least in terms of emission. So we don't really have priors on the change, if any, of emissions from heating of buildings, because probably non-residential heating decreased, but heating in residential buildings has likely increased. On the other hand, we have some preliminary information coming from interviews with public officials who confirm that agricultural activity in Italy has been rather unaffected by the lockdown, especially in the interest of securing food supply. So given that these two important sectors were not affected in terms of emissions, helps explain why we see only a partial improvement of air quality. Right, so how do we get to our estimates of the effects? Well, in Lombardia, there are many monitoring stations, and for each one of them, we build our counterfactual. To do so, we train a gradient boosting machine fed with, as I had mentioned, weather data and some calendar information on the period from 2012 to 2011. And we use, we make predictions at the daily level. Once we have trained the algorithm, we predict concentration in 2020 using the data that has been observed. And this is our counterfactual, so that hat Y is our counterfactual. So now we are making predictions also on a period before the lockdown, from January 1st to February 22nd. And now we can test So compare our counterfactual to our prediction in this window of time before the lockdown to assess the validity of our counterfactual. Once we are satisfied with that, we estimate the effect of the lockdown with a simple difference in difference strategies. Why we do so? Because we are worried that there might be some systematic bias in the counterfactual. So let's say that it might be systematically overestimating or underestimating true values. So we solve this problem simply comparing the difference between observed and counterfactual before and during the lockdown. So this is our preferred estimate. Now, the advantage of this strategy, as I had mentioned, is that it does not require us to identify a comparable region with similar trends in emissions to Lombardia that has not been treated, because that will be difficult. The one assumption which requires is that emissions are rather stable over time, over the years, but we believe that this is a rather reasonable assumption in this case. We take data on PM2.5, nitrogen dioxide, and weather from ARPA, which is the Regional Environmental Agency. We have daily averages at 79 monitors scattered throughout the region in 64 municipalities. And for each monitor, we have a counterfactual. Our algorithm is fed with weather data on a host of variables, temperature maximum and minimum, wind speed and direction, relative humidity, precipitation, and a set of indexes of atmospheric sounding. We use both contemporaneous and lagged information to improve the predictive performance. On top of this, as I had mentioned, we have a set of calendar variables to better capture seasonal trends, like year, month, week, and so on and so forth. Finally, we also feed the algorithm with a ratio of PM2.5 to PM10. And this is mainly to account for transboundary dust or desert dust that comes from outside Italy every now and then, as it has happened during the period of lockdown. All right, so how reliable is our prediction? The population-weighted average R square is 62% for nitrogen dioxide and 72% for PM2.5. Why am I talking about population-weighted weighted average? Well, because what we care about is essentially the actual exposure of people. So that's why we weight by the population of the municipality in which monitors are located. Wondering if 62% or 73% is it good? Is it bad? I've plotted here two stations. So the blue line is the observed, and the orange one is the counterfactual. So what we predict in the pre-lockdown period. So the station above essentially is a time series where our counterfactual has an R squared of 0.72, and one below has an R squared of 0.62. There is room for improvement, but we believe that this is good enough for having reliable estimates. So again, this is the 62% and 72% are averages, population-weighted averages of all counterfactual of all monitoring stations. In case you're interested, later I can also discuss a bit the ability to predict days that exceed the EU limits for annual average exposure. Just let me know at the end of the presentation. All right. This graph puts in a graphical way our results. This could be regarded as our non-parametric results. So what are these lines? Essentially, they are the population-weighted averages of the observed and counterfactual values. So we have 79 observed values, and observed time series and counterfactual time series, and we just take the average weighted by the population of municipalities. So we see that before the lockdown, for both PM2.5 above and nitrogen dioxide below, the counterfactual mimics rather well the observed values. So that should be reassuring that our counterfactual behaves quite well. And then we can see that already after the lockdown of 11 municipalities and the closure of school in the region, the gap, so a gap between the observed and the counterfactual starts opening. This is more visible in nitrogen dioxide in this week, which Lombardy was not locked down except for those 11 municipalities. But you already see that this gap widening, and this we believe should be linked to decreased immobility that we observe on the same period in the graph that I showed you earlier. And then after the lockdown Lombardia, the effect, so the difference between these two lines is rather apparent for both pollutants. But our preferred estimate, as I had mentioned, is a parametric estimate. So that means we run a regression. So regress the difference between the observed and the counterfactual on a dummy that is equal to 1 during the lockdown and 0 before the lockdown. We find that PM2.5, forgot to mention that this regression is weighted by the population, as usual. So we find that PM2.5 during the lockdown decreased by 6 micrograms per cubic meter out of a baseline, which out of the counterfactual values average. So this is out of 27, almost 29 micrograms, which is what we would have observed on average during the lockdown. And nitrogen dioxide decreased by more than 17, sorry, almost 17 out of a baseline of 45, almost 46.
Francesco, I'm sorry, you have 5 minutes left.
Okay, I'll hurry up. Okay, I forgot, I did not forget. I intentionally did not mention that there are different types of monitors, or better, monitors in different types of area. Monitors in area where pollution is representative of exposure of the general population, monitors near industrial sites and near major roads. So our results are not driven entirely by traffic and industrial stations. You should be looking at the first line if you're interested, because this is what the effect of the lockdown at background stations. We find that the effect is still large and sizable at background station. So doing some calculation, we find that concentration at background station decreased from 24, almost 25 micrograms to about 20, and those of nitrogen dioxide from almost 35 to 22. All right. In conclusion, we computed the years of life that have been saved by the improvement in air quality to those who have been lost to COVID-19. Now, we use the methodology adopted by the European Environment Agency, and we estimated reduction in PM2.5 has saved more than 8,000 years of life, and the reduction in nitrogen dioxide has saved more than 20,000 years of life. I just wanted to point out that these two numbers should not be added because we might be doing some double counting, so it's better to keep them separated. Nonetheless, we estimate so we computed the areas of life lost to COVID-19 using patient level data that we have for another project, and we find that that the improvement in air quality has saved more than 10% of what has been lost to COVID-19 in a region hardly hit by COVID like Lombardy. And I believe this is already telling. This is another reminder on the cost of air pollution for our societies in economic and health and health terms. So in conclusion, here are just a few points I would like to stress. First, if we want to estimate the effect of a lockdown or any policy like this on concentration, properly factoring weather and weather pattern is very important, it's fundamental. Second, in our study of Lombardy, we find that there has been a substantial and yet partial improvement of air quality during the lockdown. We believe that the improvement is only partial because important sectoral emissions, especially from buildings and agriculture, are little affected by the lockdown. That means that if we want to have air pollution policy that works, it needs to be it needs to cover all relevant sectors, and the amount might be varying with season. That said, I don't want to downplay the effect that the reduction of road transport has had, because the reduction in nitrogen dioxide and PM2.5 are much larger at traffic stations, traffic monitors. So that's still a big result. Finally, I think the comparison with COVID-19 leaves some food for thought, and as a reminder of the effort and the cost that we spend to reduce air pollution. And with that, I thank you for your presentation, and I think I can hand in the presentation, the screen, to Guido for a discussion. Guido, you should be able to share your screen.
Thank you. Do you see it?
Yes.
No, thank you for your presentation, because it is, from my point of view, really interesting, and exactly it is what we need to answer to some important question to drive the action in the next month, because really we are working as ARPA Lombardia on the results of this sad experiment, but in any case unique, we hope, experiment. We publish some results, if you want, in our website for Lombardia and also for Po Valley in Life Prepare project. Really, more or less, we saw for emissions the things that you described: a great decrease in traffic, a decrease not so big, but in any case important for industrial activities and in energy production. For domestic heating, really, we had a small increase linked to smart working, because more people were at home, and so an increase, at least for residential heating. While for agriculture, more or less, we didn't see any change, because the activities were more or less the same that without the lockdown. We calculate the emissions, and what we saw a decrease, an important decrease of NOx emissions, more or less on the Po Valley 40% as maximum, while a decrease for PM10, but not so important, more or less 10%. A decrease of primary PM10, because we know that part of PM10 is of secondary origin. So what happened to concentration compared to the years before 2020? We had a great decrease in NO2 concentrations, while the PM10 had a more controversial trend. So what happened? Happened that a lot of people said to us, okay, if also a great decrease in traffic, like the decrease that we had during lockdown, doesn't give results, it is not useful to act on traffic. I think that your presentation gives us some some important answers on that. So I try to underline them, and I am really interested in your comment. The first question that, from my point of view, you answered, but I'd like to have in your opinion on that. We saw a decrease in NO2, but without lockdown, probably also particular matter would have been higher. In my opinion, your study answer this question. What do you think also about the reduction in traffic emissions? Another question is linked, a more general question, if also with the big reduction in emissions that we had during lockdown, we didn't have enough, a decrease enough to respect the EU limit. What we can do more from your point of view, from what you saw looking at your results? And as the last question, from your study, what is the importance of meteorology? Because we saw also from your results that probably the decrease was higher in some conditions and lower in other conditions. Not in all days you obtain the same results. So what do you think about that? Thank you very much in any case, because I really found it useful to support the importance of the policies to control emissions, even if for PM10 we hadn't the open results. Thank you, and I give you the screen again.
You give, okay. Guido, I will pass to Francesco.
Yeah, can you see my screen?
Yes.
We do, yeah.
Okay. So thank you, Guido. Thanks a lot for the comment and the question that helps me clarify a few things. I'll start from your last question on the meteo. I believe that weather is very important. And why am I saying this? That if we are able to make some good predictions on such a volatile trend, and so if you can see this image, so if we can predict very well these type of peaks, is because weather is a very good predictor of PM2.5 and NO2. So as we feed the machine only weather and some calendar variables, this is here you have the explanatory power of weather. So yes, I will stress this is extremely important. For this reason, that studies that just compare before and after or of different cities and do not properly account for variations and differences in weather are likely going to obtain a biased estimate. I think this same graph might also give you a picture of what would have happened if we didn't have the lockdown. So you would have had those orange lines. You were mentioning the limits set by you for annual levels, which is a 25 for PM2.5, which is a line that crosses about here. So we would have had more than a few days above the threshold. And I'll spend a couple more words about that later. And also, especially nitrogen dioxide, I mean, we will have had many days above the threshold. You mentioned traffic emissions. And that's something maybe I skipped or went too fast. You can see that, so these two numbers that I showed you that I commented on show you the effect that we measured at background station. Now, these two coefficients, 424, 728, are the additional effect at traffic stations on top of the ones we observe at background stations. So that means that near major roads, on average, we have a reduction of 4 micrograms more than the rest, more than background station. At the nitrogen dioxide, we have a reduction of 7 micrograms on top of the 12. So it almost gets to 20 micrograms per cubic meter. So I really do not want to underplay the importance of reductions of transport emissions. Quite the contrary. They do have played a role. And correct me if I'm wrong, but nitrogen dioxide in Lombardy, it's for a good part emitted by internal combustion engines of cars and trucks. So the fact that we estimate a bigger reduction in NO2 than PM2.5, for example, that also originates from other sources, is already telling that yes, the reduction in mobility has improved substantially the quality of air. And then you mentioned the exceedances of EU limits. So, okay, the EU sets these limits for average annual exposure. Okay, so let's be clear about that. But still, we computed the numbers of days that would have been above this threshold if we didn't have a lockdown. So the imposition of the restrictions has decreased the exceedances, the number of days exceeding this threshold, by 3/4 when we look at nitrogen dioxide, and by more than half when we look at PM2.5. Now here we're talking about only exceedances, and now by how much. But still, if this is a concern, I think it should be. I think those are not small numbers. I think I don't know if you had other questions. If not, I think Lara, I'll be happy to take questions from our audience.
Thank you, Francesco and Guido. So some of the questions from the audience have just been answered. So if you don't mind, I won't go through them again. There's
Okay,
also Francesco just put his email there. So if you want more clarification. There's several questions here. I'm gonna go through some of them. There's one that I think is interesting. Well, all of them are interesting, sorry, but this one was one of the first. So how would you account for the fact that part of the pollution felt in Lombardy is due to economics outside Lombardy?
Okay. The point is, so there is a transboundary pollution normally, and it is possible that pollution coming from outside the region during the lockdown might have decreased because other regions were locked down. So we might be, so our observed, let's say, what we observe is low because reduction of emissions in Lombardy and somewhere else. So in this sense, if we only had a lockdown in Lombardy and not somewhere else, we might see a smaller reduction in air pollution. That for sure, yes. So we also look at, so we put in the algorithm, so we fit it also with wind direction precisely to have a better not to account for, but at least partially account for pollution that comes from outside Italy. But sure, this is absolutely a possibility that it's not accounted for. So yeah, I would say that if we only lock down Lombardy and not the rest of let's call it upwind regions, the effect might be smaller. Although maybe
they are merged some of the.
Yeah, maybe just so maybe Guido, you have a better idea of than I do on how much transboundary pollution in Lombardy matters, at least in relative terms.
Really, Po Valley is the basin, so the decrease in emissions in other regions of Po Valley influence for sure the values, but probably more the background station levels. When you showed the results for traffic, probably is linked more to the decrease in that point. For transboundary, probably only dust from deserts are important, because with Alps and Apennines, really it is only a small part of pollution that comes from outside Po Valley.
Okay, so we try to account for transboundary dust with the ratio PM2.5 to PM2.10, which actually this ratio is, we were looking at the data, predicts very well this type of events. So yeah, I was actually, when answering discussion, I was talking about pollution coming from outside the country, but of course, having very strict measure only in the city of Milan, for example, or its province, without taking any measure on the surrounding regions of Italy, of the Po Valley, will be will not be as effective. Of course, it will need to be more of a regional policy or a macro-regional policy.
Thank you. Let's move forward. I'll merge some of these questions, okay? So some people are mentioning about the design of the policy. So how do we design policies for this region? Do all the sectors need to be included? Can we design seasonal policies? And how costly is to reduce emissions from agriculture, and how they should be done?
Okay, the design, it's very, it has no easy answer, unfortunately. But what we get from this study, it's a multi-sectoral story. So you cannot rely on intervention in only one sector. Of course, some type of intervention in one sector or another might have different costs and different feasibility, both in technical and political terms. So they, of course, might explain why we put more efforts on one type of policy than another. You had mentioned seasonality, and for sure, seasonality. So sectors have different relative contributions by season. For instance, of course, it's very obvious that heating are more important during cold winter days than springtime. While on the other hand, emissions that come from agriculture and breeding and herding are more relevant in the spring or early spring and other times of the year. So yes, a policy should be covering up also, include this fact that there's seasonality. Of course, there are already policy in place, but as we see, this is not sufficient to give us greater quality.
So may I just go ahead and do a few more questions? Just to include everybody's opinions if I can. So the other question are about your counterfactuals. So if you can explain the biases that you had in the pre-test you did, and some people were saying during the lockdown, how was the weather during the lockdown? The fact that we had this specific weather during the lockdown influencing or biasing your study. And also a question I think you answered, but maybe you can answer again. Some people mention, why did you do a counterfactual instead of using last year's observations or past year's observation?
Okay, so there was a question on the what I call systematic bias, which is a possibility that the counterfactual is might be systematically overshooting or undershooting. I mean, this is more of a being scrupulous. So, but if you look at this, which is our main result, if we had a systematic overshooting, that is the or undershooting, say the counterfactual is always bigger, is always above or below the threshold. Oh, sorry, above or below the observed values. Then the constant in this regression, I hope you can see my screen. The constant discretion should be significant. No, we don't find this for PM2.5. We find this for nitrogen dioxide. What does it mean? That PM2.5, the counterfactual for PM2.5 before the lockdown, so the average of the counterfactual is equal to the average of the observed before the lockdown. While for nitrogen dioxide, the observed values are a bit smaller than the counterfactual. But what we matter, so using this approach, what matters is not the average, but it's what we care about is the fact that they go together, so that they move around together. And we see that in the graphs and in the R squared, and I showed you that this happens quite well. But then you had a question on the bias coming from weather. So the precise point of our paper is that our estimates are not biased by weather, but because they entirely depend on weather. So at most, the biases will come from poor predictive power. That means our square are not 90%, 99%. So there's a part of the variation that we did not explain with weather. So we might have some sort of error that I concede, but it's not coming from the weather itself. I hope I answered all the questions that you had.
Okay, I'll just go through two more. So I'm sorry for everybody, but you can keep posting questions. I'll make sure that Francesco gets them in the end, and we'll be able to answer. So yeah, there's two questions. One question is relating to ozone. What happened to ozone in those days? And the other question is related to the looking at daily, so hourly variation that could help disentangle some effects, from example, the peaks from traffic and so on, if you had a look at that. And the last question is what do you think the other external factors should be added to your model? And I close here, but you can keep posting questions. I'll make sure this reach Francesco, or you can also just email.
Yes, please. Me. Okay, these are very interesting questions. So ozone, as you might be aware of, is not such a big of a problem in winter when levels are lower. It's more of a problem in summertime. We nonetheless had a look at ozone, but ozone is very volatile, and we simply decided that our predictive power, that is our ability to have a reliable and valid counterfactual, was not high enough. That's why we did not did the same exercise for ozone. Hourly variation, that's also very interesting. It might be hourly variations are also highly volatile, so they might be a bit more difficult, sorry, to capture. But in theory, you could extend this type of analysis also to hourly variations. I think we didn't do it because there's not enough hourly data on PA2.5. But in principle, you can use the same methodology for other for estimating hourly variation in other settings. Finally, what other external variables could be used to improve the model? That's a very good question. In principle, anything that helps, so it is a predictor of concentration, so it increases predictive power. But at the same time, it's very important that it must be something that is not affected by your policy or by the lockdown, because in this case, you will be contaminating your counterfactual and introducing a bias in this sense. For any other questions, I think we're running out of time. But for any other question, you can drop me an email. This is my email address.
I'll take one. I'll take one more of a person with the. If you don't mind taking one more. I'm not sure if it's the right place to ask this here, but so the question is, can virus be airborne? can virus be transported in these particles? And if yes, how efficient are the filters, and which what do you recommend this type of filter and mask?
Okay, so I'm not the I'm no epidemiologist or no virologist, so perhaps I'm not the most expert person on viruses, but for sure the exposure to air pollution in the short, but especially in the long term, does deplete our health and our cardio and pulmonary system. This is shown. This is a solid evidence. So in another work that I hope we'll be presenting soon, we are looking at whether long-term exposure to PM2.5 decreases your ability to, your health stock, let's put it that way, and might be making you more susceptible once you have COVID-19 or any other type of virus. So it might increase vulnerability to this type of infections. And about filters, I'm also maybe not the best expert, but there's but I can tell my personal experience. I do use filters living in Milan, considering the high levels of pollution. Okay, yeah. So I don't know if you're running out of time and you want to put in another question.
I think we can stop here.
Okay.
And people have your email. I would like to thank so much for all the people that have attended online, and for and to Guido for being here with us and making this discussion even more interesting, and for Francesco for this very interesting study. So thanks everybody, and hope to see you in the next webinar.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you both. Ciao.